The wind screamed through the pine trees like a living thing, clawing at the roof of Daniel Mitchell's mountain cabin. He stood in the doorway, jaw tight, watching the wagon grind down the frozen path. Another woman was leaving, her red scarf whipped behind her like a flag of surrender as the wagon disappeared around the bend. That made seven. 7 mail-order brides who had fled before the first week was done. Daniel turned back inside, shutting out the howl of the storm. The cabin fell into silence except for the crackle of fire. He tossed another log into the hearth and leaned against the wall, his chest heavy with the same old ache. He wasn't a cruel man, only a quiet one. But quiet could be its own kind of punishment. At 32, Daniel had made a life in the Colorado high country that few could stand. He trapped through winters when even the wolves went hungry. He cut every log of this cabin himself, his calloused hands proof of years spent earning every meal from the earth. He had food, shelter, and land enough for two. What he didn't have was company that lasted longer than a snowfall. The marriage broker in Denver kept his letters polite. "We'll find you someone steady, Mr. Mitchell," the man wrote, "someone practical." But each time the wagon came, Daniel saw only the same story in a new dress. Women who wanted romance, not hard work. Women who dreamed of quiet sunsets, but couldn't stand the silence when the sun went down. Now winter was closing in again, and he told himself this would be the last attempt. The broker's letter had said her name was Ruth Gutierrez, 28 years old, a seamstress from New York. A woman of fuller figure, the note had added, and sound judgment. Daniel didn't care about her size. He only cared if she'd stay. For 3 long weeks, he kept the cabin ready, stacking wood, mending tools, pretending not to look down the trail each time the wind carried the faint jingle of harness bells. When at last the sound became real, he stepped outside and saw the wagon grinding through knee-deep snow, the horses blowing clouds of steam. The driver, old Pete Morrison, raised a gloved hand in greeting. "Brought you your bride, Mitchell?" Took every ounce of grit she had to make this ride. Beside him sat a woman bundled head to toe in heavy wool. She climbed down slow and steady, boots sinking deep into the drift. When she pulled off her scarf, Daniel found himself staring into a pair of dark, steady eyes. There was no fear in them, only calm appraisal. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, voice low but firm, "I am Ruth Gutierrez. I've come as arranged." Daniel nodded, caught off guard by her composure. "Ma'am, welcome to the mountain." Pete gave them both a sharp look as he unhitched a small trunk. "Weather's turning wicked. I'll be lucky to make it off this peak before night. You folks take care." And with that, he was gone, leaving the two of them standing alone as snowflakes spun between them like white ghosts. "Come inside," Daniel said finally. "It's too cold to stand talking." The cabin's warmth closed around them. Ruth looked slowly around the single large room, taking in the stone hearth, the sturdy table, the shelves lined with jars of dried beans and venison. She laid one gloved hand on the table's smooth surface. "You built this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am. Took me 3 summers." "It's good work," she said. "Solid." Then she set down her bag and began unwrapping her scarf and coat, revealing broad shoulders, capable arms, and the calm confidence of someone who had survived harder winters than this. "I can see you know how to make things that last." Daniel wasn't sure why, but her words settled something restless inside him. That evening he made stew and fresh bread, apologizing for the plain meal. Ruth tasted it, then looked him straight in the eye. "It's good," she said simply. "You bake it yourself?" "Had to learn. Can't count on much out here but yourself." "I can bake and sew and preserve food," she said. "You need not worry about me earning my keep." Daniel shook his head. "It's not about keepin' score. Out here, it's about survivin'. The mountain doesn't forgive mistakes." Quote, "I understand," Ruth said. Her tone wasn't defiant. It was sure. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something like peace settle over the cabin. The next morning, Ruth rose early and began working as though she'd lived there her whole life. She mended torn shirts, reorganized the pantry, and swept the floor till it shone. When Daniel came in from checking traps, he found coffee hot on the stove and his tools lined neatly on the bench. "You don't waste time," he said, half smiling. "Idle hands make poor company," she replied, not looking up from her stitching. By the third day, Daniel realized the cabin felt different, not softer, just alive. Ruth never complained about the cold or the long silences. She asked questions about the land, the weather, the animals. She learned fast, her sharp mind catching details most people missed. That night, as snow fell thick outside, she asked, "How many came before me?" Daniel hesitated. 7. "And none stayed." He nodded. They thought they wanted adventure. What they wanted was comfort. Ruth's eyes met his across the firelight. "Then they came to the wrong place. I didn't come here for comfort. I came for honesty." Her words struck him harder than any storm. 3 days later, the mountain tested them. A blizzard swept down without warning, howling through the valley and shaking the cabin till the logs creaked. Daniel checked the walls for weak spots, worry tightening his jaw. "You're worried about something," Ruth said, calm as ever. "The north wall settled last spring," he admitted. "If it gives, we'll lose the fire." "Show me!" They worked side by side, packing cloth into the cracks, Ruth's smaller hands quick and sure. When the job was done, Daniel realized his heart was pounding, not from the cold, but from something else, something warm and unfamiliar. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome," she replied. "Two people can always do more than one." The storm raged for 3 days, but the cabin held. When the sun finally broke through, lighting the mountains in blinding white, Ruth stepped outside and whispered, "It's beautiful." Quote. Daniel watched her, snow glittering in her dark hair, and said softly, "Yes, it is." For the first time, he believed this one might stay. The morning after the blizzard, the world looked new. Snow covered everything like a clean white blanket, softening the edges of even the harshest rocks. Daniel stepped outside to clear the path, his breath clouding the sharp air, and paused when he saw Ruth standing near the corral. She was feeding the horses, moving carefully but confidently through drifts that reached almost to her knees. He watched her for a long moment. The other brides had spent their mornings crying, writing letters home, or begging to leave. Ruth was humming. When she turned and caught him watching, she smiled faintly. "They're calmer if you talk to them," she said, "same as people." Daniel felt something stir in him that he hadn't felt in years, a quiet warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Over the following days, their routines settled into a steady rhythm. Daniel taught Ruth how to check the traps and cut kindling properly. She showed him how to stretch provisions and mend torn clothing so well it looked new. It wasn't a life of comfort, but it was one of purpose. One evening, while the wind whispered against the windows, Ruth surprised him by speaking about her past. "I worked in a textile mill since I was 14, she said, her voice calm but low. "When the fire took my parents, I raised my 2 younger brothers. They're grown now, both married. I saved enough to come west when the mill closed." Daniel listened in silence. She wasn't asking for pity. She was stating facts, the way a person might describe the weather. "That's a hard life," he said. "I've had practice at hard things," she replied. "It makes this," she gestured to the cabin, "seem almost peaceful." Daniel stared into the fire, unsure how to answer. He'd always imagined a wife would make his home softer, fill the air with chatter. But Ruth's quiet strength suited the mountain far better than noise ever could. Weeks passed. The snow deepened, sealing them in for the long winter. Daniel began showing Ruth the survival lessons that had kept him alive over the years. How to read the clouds before a storm, how to recognize animal tracks, how to fix a snare line with cold, stiff fingers. She learned fast. One bitter morning, as they practiced firing the rifle, Ruth lowered it after hitting the target squarely. "Daniel," she said, "are you satisfied with our life as it is?" Quote. The question caught him off guard. "Satisfied?" he repeated. "We're surviving, aren't we?" "That's not what I asked." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You mean, are we happy?" Ruth met his eyes steadily. "We share the work and the meals. But I don't know if we share anything else. Is that what you want from this marriage?" "A business arrangement?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For years, words had come easy when dealing with weather, timber, or tools, but never with people. Finally, he said quietly, "What I want is something real. I just don't expect it anymore." Ruth studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Something real," she repeated. "That's all I want too." Quote, from that day forward, something changed between them. It wasn't spoken, but it was there, in the way Daniel lingered a little longer by the fire at night, in the way Ruth's laughter, rare but deep, filled the cabin when he said something unexpectedly kind. Christmas came quietly. Ruth baked bread with dried berries she'd saved, and Daniel carved her a small wooden comb. She smiled when she opened the gift, tracing the smooth grain with her thumb. "You have skilled hands," she said. "I'm learning patience," he replied. "You're a good teacher." That night, as they sat watching the fire die low, Ruth spoke softly. "I was married once before, a long time ago. He died of consumption." Daniel turned to her, surprised. "I'm sorry." "I was 19. It was short, but it taught me something. Love is not enough by itself. You need trust and work, the kind of work that builds something." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then maybe we're building it already." Winter dragged on, bitter and relentless. When Daniel left for days to check the high country traps, Ruth kept the cabin alive, her careful planning keeping their supplies steady. He'd returned to find hot stew waiting and the fire roaring bright. One night, after a long absence, Daniel found her asleep at the table, mending one of his shirts. He stood, watching her for a moment, the glow of lamplight catching her face, soft and tired, but peaceful. Gently, he lifted the needle from her hand and draped a blanket over her shoulders. She stirred, but didn't wake. "You came back," she murmured. "I said I would," he whispered. When spring finally broke through the snow, it brought more than sunlight. The air was softer, filled with dripping meltwater and the scent of pine sap. Daniel and Ruth spent the thaw repairing fences and restocking traps. They worked side by side, each step easy, each silence comfortable. One morning, as they cleared fallen branches, Ruth looked toward the horizon. "I think we should add another room," she said. "Something for sewing, maybe for a child someday." Daniel froze. "You want children?" Quote. Ruth smiled faintly. "A family, yes, a real one." He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. "I'd like that too," he said. That evening, when the sun dipped low and turned the peaks gold, Daniel found himself staring at her profile as she sat sewing by the fire. The thought hit him suddenly and completely. He didn't just respect her, he loved her. The mountain had taken everything from him once: peace, company, hope. But Ruth Gutierrez, the woman everyone else might have dismissed, had given it all back. When the first wagon of spring finally climbed the mountain trail, old Pete Morrison gave a low whistle at the sight of them together. "Well, I'll be," he said, grinning. "Looks like this one's stuck, Mitchell." Daniel slipped his arm around Ruth's shoulders. "She's not going anywhere," he said. Pete chuckled. "Can't imagine you'd let her." Daniel looked down at Ruth, her dark eyes steady and full of quiet humor. "She wouldn't let me if I tried." As the wagon rattled away, Daniel realized something had changed deep inside him. For the first time in his life, the silence of the mountains didn't feel empty. It felt full of laughter, shared work, and the heartbeat of the woman who refused to leave. Spring came late that year, as if the mountain wasn't ready to surrender its snow. But when it finally did, the thaw brought a new rhythm to life at the cabin. Streams gurgled again. The scent of pine replaced the bite of frost. And with every sunrise, Daniel felt more certain that he'd found what he had been searching for all along: a partner, not just a wife. Ruth Gutierrez had done what no other woman could. She hadn't tried to change the mountain or the man who lived on it. She had learned its ways and his, until both had become part of her. Their days filled with work that never truly ended, repairing fences, planting a garden, preparing for next winter, but there was joy in it now. Ruth sang softly while she worked, her low voice blending with the wind through the pines. Daniel found himself listening for it, comforted by the sound. One warm morning in May, Ruth stood outside surveying the cabin walls. "We should add another room," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "For my sewing and for the future." Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "The future?" She met his gaze, a hint of a smile tugging her lips. "A family, Daniel. Isn't that what we're building here?" For a moment, words failed him. Then he nodded. "Yes, Ruth, that's exactly what we're building." They started the project together. Daniel cut logs and set beams while Ruth mixed the clay for chinking. She was as strong as any worker he'd ever known, never complaining, never stopping before the day's light faded. Every swing of her hammer, every brush of her hand across a finished wall, seemed to say, "I belong here." By midsummer, the new room stood sturdy against the slope, a space filled with promise. One evening, Daniel walked Ruth through it, their footsteps echoing off the fresh timber. "This'll be your sewing room now," he said. "And later?" she asked. He smiled. "Then it'll be our child's room." Ruth's hand brushed his arm. "You sound sure of that." "I am," he said simply. "You make me sure." Quote, their lives settled into something deeper than routine. They had grown beyond survival. They had built trust. When the storms came, they faced them together. When Daniel rode out to check his traps, he returned to a warm fire and a woman who always waited. And when Ruth fell quiet at the end of long days, he learned to listen instead of filling the silence. Summer turned to gold and then to red as autumn rolled over the peaks. The air grew sharp again. One evening, as the first flakes of snow drifted past the window, Ruth sat knitting by the fire. "I've been thinking about the women who came before me," she said softly. "Do you ever wonder why they left so quickly?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering. "They came looking for a storybook life," he said. "They wanted the mountain to change for them. You," he paused, smiling slightly, "you let the mountain change you." Ruth nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "It's a hard place," she said, "but hard things reveal who you are. Maybe that's why I stayed." Quote, "You stayed because you were meant to," Daniel said, his voice low and steady. "You're the only one who ever understood what this life really is." Ruth reached across the table and took his hand. "Then we're both lucky, Daniel. We found the life we were meant for." Winter returned with its sharp bite, but it no longer frightened them. Their cabin, once a lonely shelter, had become a home. Each creak of timber, each howl of wind, was just another sound in the life they shared. Then, one pale morning, Ruth told Daniel she was expecting. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. Then, he wrapped his arms around her, holding her close while the fire snapped and hissed behind them. "We'll raise our child right here," he said finally. "They'll learn what it means to earn every good thing." Ruth smiled through tears. "Then they'll learn well." Months passed. The snow melted again, revealing the green slopes of another spring. When Pete Morrison's wagon finally returned up the mountain trail, the old driver broke into a wide grin at the sight of them. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Looks like you two done more than survive. You've built something worth keeping." Daniel laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "We figured out the secret, Pete. You don't fight the mountain, you learn to live with it." Pete looked from Daniel to Ruth, his weathered face softening. "And it looks like the mountain finally gave you something back." After Pete left, Daniel and Ruth stood together in the quiet. The peaks glowed orange in the evening light. Below them, the valley stretched wide and endless. Ruth placed his hand over her stomach. "Our child will know this land," she said. "They'll know what it cost us to build a life here." Daniel nodded. "And they'll know they were born out of strength, not luck." That night, as the stars burned cold and clear above the mountains, Daniel sat on the porch while Ruth slept inside. He listened to the night sounds, the soft wind, the creek's murmur, the steady rhythm of life all around him. He thought about the 7 women who had left before Ruth. Each one had brought a little more disappointment, a little more emptiness, but Ruth had filled that emptiness completely. She had stayed when no one else would. Inside, he heard her stir. The sound of her voice drifted through the half-open door. "Daniel," she called softly, "come to bed." He smiled to himself. "Come in, Ruth." As he stepped back into the cabin's warm glow, he looked around at everything they had built. The walls they'd strengthened together, the table where they'd shared their first meal, the hearth that had seen them through every storm. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't easy, but it was real. The mountain man who had once lived alone now had a home, a wife, and soon a family. And all because one woman, the one everyone underestimated, had refused to leave.